In this video, we are talking about 10 players that you must start in week 7 of fantasy football. But before we get into it, if you could please like the video, subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it. Starting at number 1 with Chase Brown, who's really starting to cook over these last 3 weeks, racking up 4 touchdowns and has scored at least 14 fantasy points in every game over that stretch. And Brown saw his best snap share and route participation in week 6, along with seeing 100% of the red zone snaps. Brown has been one of the better backs in all of football from an advanced metric standpoint, as he ranks 2nd in missed tackles forced per attempt, 10th in yards after contact per attempt, 10th in explosive run rate, and gets a very favorable matchup in week 7 against the struggling Cleveland defense, who have allowed the 12th most rushing yards per game. I'd expect Cincinnati to control the majority of this game, as they're probably going to get up big early, which is going to mean they're going to run the football a lot to drain out the clock, which means Chase Brown is going to get a lot of work on a really good offense. I'm expecting him to have another big game, even if Zach Moss is more involved as he gets healthier. Chase Brown is the alpha in this Cincinnati backfield. At number 2, Jameson Williams has been tremendous this year, and what he's doing so far is not a fluke, as he's 1st in separation, 5th in route win rate. I will say Jameson's targets over the last 3 weeks have not been great, as he hasn't seen more than 4 targets in any game over that span. He's sporting a 19% target share on the year, but when he does get targeted, it's usually for a 50-yard, 60-yard bomb touchdown from Jared Goff, so we like that. As Williams is sporting a 15.1 ADOT average depth of target, which is one of the best marks in all of football right now. And what's really positive for this week, even though Williams' target share that we talked about hasn't been great, Jameson does lead the Lions in target share when Goff has been blitzed this season. And we know Brian Flores and this Minnesota defense blitzes at an extremely high rate, actually the 2nd highest rate in the NFL at 41%. So I'd expect Jared Goff to rely a lot on Williams this week. I think Jameson has another monster game. What's nice about Williams is it only takes a couple catches, a long touchdown for him to have a strong fantasy outing. I'm expecting, though, for it to be a really nice game for J-Mo in week 7. I'm projecting over 100 yards and a touchdown on a long reception. So get Williams in your lineup, and I think he absolutely goes off in week 7. At number 3, Chuba Hubbard has been an absolute revelation for fantasy this year, being on a capable offense now that Bryce Young is on the bench and Andy Dalton is under center. It's been a big reason why Hubbard has been so successful. And just look at the numbers. He's averaged 20 fantasy points per game since Dalton took over in week 3 and is the running back 5 on the season. That's something that I did not have on my bingo card. And over his last 4 games, Chuba has at least scored 15 fantasy points and rushed for at least 90 yards. And even this week against the red hot Commanders, the concern might be, well, what happens if Washington gets up big early? It shouldn't really matter, as Hubbard has earned at least 4 targets in 5 straight games. And that all being said, the matchup is a juicy one, as Washington has allowed 5.3 yards per carry, which is the 2nd most in the league, along with allowing the 12th most fantasy points per game to running backs this season. So Chuba is cooking right now, and you start your running backs against Washington because they don't have a really good run-stopping unit, and even if the Commanders get up big, Hubbard can have success through the air. So any way you slice it, Chuba is going to put up another big performance in week 7. At number 4, Tyreek Hill. When you drafted Hill this offseason with a top 3, top 4 pick, you were ecstatic. You were so excited because Hill is an incredible NFL player. He's incredible for fantasy. And then 1 week later, Tua suffers a concussion, and it's been a train wreck ever since for not just Tyreek, but for Jalen Waddle, for Devon Achane, for this entire Miami offense. It did get a little bit better, though, in week 5 for Tyreek, as he had 6 catches for 69 yards on 10 targets, 12.9 fantasy points. And with Miami coming out of a bye this week, Huntley has now had some time to learn the offense, build chemistry with his receivers, and that's a good thing. I think this offense is going to come out looking better this week. And if you have Tyreek Hill, you have to start him. I know people have been benching him the last couple of weeks, but a team coming out of a bye, well rested, they've had time to get on the same page. And last week, the last time Hill played, he looked pretty good with Huntley. So I'm encouraged. The matchup is also just too good, Hill is just too good to leave on your bench this week, as the Colts have allowed the 7th most yards and 11th most fantasy points per game to receivers. They've been absolutely cooked by receivers, especially outside receivers this year, as they've allowed the 8th most receiving yards per game to perimeter receivers. I think Tyreek scores a long touchdown, whether it's a long pass or it's a slant that Hill takes to the house. I am feeling optimistic. I'm feeling really good. I think Hill's going to have his best game of the season without Tua in week 7. Get him in your lineup, and he's going to go off this week. At number 5, Ramondre Stevenson, coming off that foot injury. It looks like he's going to play, as he did log a full practice on Friday. Obviously, follow the injury report. Make sure he does play, because if he is good to go, Stevenson has looked like a nice back this year, even though he's getting no help on offense. The offensive line hasn't been great, but Ramondre ranks 6th in yards after contact per attempt. He's recorded 19 missed tackles forced this year, which is 4th in the NFL. And he's had 3 games with 17 plus fantasy points. We saw last week, Antonio Gibson, he's not a thing. He's never going to be a thing. He had the backfield to himself, essentially, and looked terrible. Didn't even earn that much work. He's not a good player. So when Stevenson comes back, he's going to be the workhorse. New England paid him right before the season started. He is their guy. I think the quarterback upgrade is going to help with Drake May under center. This offense is going to sustain drives a little bit better than if Brissett was under center. He's a good quarterback. May can scramble. So this offense gets a boost. Maybe defenses will have to respect the pass a little bit more. Opening up some lanes for Stevenson could be a positive. And the Jaguars, we saw against the Bears, they're just a really bad defense. Any way you slice it, they're terrible. And I think they've already kind of quit on themselves at this point. The Jaguars have allowed a running back to go over 15 fantasy points in every game but one this season. So you're starting Stevenson. If he's active, I'd be starting him with confidence and expect a big day from the really talented back. At number 6, Tank Dell finally had his best game in week 6. 7 catches, 57 yards, a touchdown on 9 targets, 18.7 fantasy points, and set season highs in routes run and targets, along with leading the team with a whopping 43% first read share. And it appears Dell is making his way back from several injuries this offseason. He's getting back into his true form. And that's going to be scary once he does, because we know how good of a player Dell is. Just look at his numbers from his rookie year. And Dell also had the highest route win rate and average separation score among Texans receivers in week 6. So that's good to see. And now in week 7, it's going to be fireworks, as 2 high-powered offenses, 2 ascending superstar quarterbacks, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, square off with a really good corner in Jair Alexander. Probably going to be seeing a lot of Stephon Diggs. We know they've had beef in the past, Alexander and Diggs, that is. So I bet Jair's going to want to be covering Stephon as much as possible. And that's going to put Dell in a lot of good situations against not so great corners. So I think Stroud is going to be looking for Dell early and often in this one. That figures to be a high-scoring affair. Both teams are going to have to put up a lot of points, which we like from a fantasy perspective. And the Packers have allowed the 12th highest PPR points per target. So get Dell in your lineup. He probably already is in your lineup after last week, but if you have a tough decision between him and someone else, I would lean starting Dell if you can. At number 7, Jackson Smith-Njigba is the wide receiver 34 in fantasy points per game. He was one of my guys that I really liked this offseason, and we really haven't seen it all come together, but it's still early on in the year. He hasn't done much, though, outside of his big week 2 performance where he reeled in 12 catches for 117 yards, 23.7 fantasy points. He's been relatively quiet ever since, but unlike last year, at least JSN is getting on the field. That is a positive, as he leads all Seahawks wide receivers in routes run at 93% on the year. So they're using him a ton. And with Seattle being one of the most pass-happy offenses in the NFL, as Geno Smith leads all quarterbacks in pass attempts with 251 attempts and yards with 1,778 passing yards. And on top of all of that, Seattle is a very fast-paced offense. They run a lot of plays per game. Ryan Grubb, the new offensive coordinator there, is doing a fantastic job. And it just feels like JSN at any point can have a monster performance. don't forget the talent of Jackson. He's a special receiver, as he led all receivers in separation last week with an 87% separation on his routes, all receivers, not just in Seattle, but in the NFL. He's a really good player, and he's getting opportunities. These bigger games are coming, especially when the situation is perfect. And I think we get that in week 7 because it's going to be a high-scoring affair against Atlanta, who's a really good offense in their own right, and this game has the highest projected point total of the week. So JSN should have no problem against the Falcons, who have allowed the 14th most receiving yards per game to slot receivers. Get JSN in your lineup, and I'm expecting a blow-up performance. At number 8, Garrett Wilson. I know. If you're a Wilson owner, you're not feeling great overall with Davante Adams now in town. But I'm not looking at this as such a horrible thing for Wilson, and let me tell you why. Will Garrett's targets go down? Yes, absolutely. But Adams is going to drastically improve this Jets offense. He's going to take a lot of attention away from Wilson. We know Garrett Wilson, fantastic route runner, strong separator. Part of the issues early on in the year is he was getting doubled. He was getting blanketed. They're not going to be able to do that anymore, and Rodgers isn't just going to stop throwing to Garrett just because Davante's in town. Like, Wilson is a really talented player. He's going to get open often. It'd be foolish for Rodgers just to stop. So I think with Adams in town, this offense is going to sustain longer drives. They're going to be in scoring position. Garrett Wilson is going to get his. He's still going to rack up a ton of fantasy points. He's going to be put in a lot of high value positions, which is going to be really good for fantasy. He's going to win his one-on-one matchups. He's going to shred nickel corners in the slot. He's going to have a really good year. I think he's going to have a better year now with Adams in town. Like, Sunday Night Football, who's going to cover Davante Adams? Joey Porter Jr. That's going to leave Garrett in really good spots. And I think Wilson has a monster performance on Sunday Night Football, as the Steelers are allowing the 7th most PPR points per target. So get Wilson in your lineup. Don't be scared that Adams is now in town. I think he's still going to eat. At number 9, David Njoku. It should be an absolute crime having any Cleveland Brown skill position player in a must-start video, but here we are. Yes, this offense looks horrendous. Yes, Deshaun Watson is a terrible NFL quarterback. I mean, absolutely terrible. But with Amari Cooper now gone, going to Buffalo, that's going to open up the door for David, who is going to probably lead this team in targets for the rest of the season, as Njoku saw a 30% target share in week 6. We like to see that. And yes, while it might not be pretty, hopefully Deshaun can get the football into Njoku's hands. It can't be that hard. Njoku doesn't have a far ADOT. It's going to be the short, intermediate, little dump downs. Can you do that, Deshaun? Can you do that? Please. Like, this isn't a receiver that we're touting on the Cleveland Browns. This is a tight end. This is a guy you can just dump the ball off to. So I think that's what we're going to see. Yes, Jerry Jeudy's there, but he's not very good in his own right. So I think Watson is going to pepper Njoku with targets. And on top of that, it's a good matchup for Njoku. It's a good matchup for tight ends, as Cincinnati is allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to the position. So if you're in need of a tight end, if you don't know who to start, because a lot of tight ends haven't been good this year, I would feel really good. Oh, it pains me to say, but I feel pretty good about Njoku being in my tight end 1 spot this week. At number 10, Tank Bigsby was my start of the week last week, and that was a terrible call. I apologize if he burned you. It was really disappointing to see. But this is under the assumption that ETN doesn't play, as he's nursing that hamstring injury. He doesn't suit up, then I think Bigsby's going to have a big day. Yes, last week, Jacksonville turned to Dearness Johnson in a negative game script because the Bears were just crushing the Jaguars early on, and they had no choice but to throw, as Bigsby only saw 27% of the snaps, which was really unfortunate, but he's still the best running back on Jacksonville. I think Bigsby is still one of the better running backs in the league from an advanced metric standpoint, as he ranks 1st in explosive run rate, 1st in yards after contact per attempt, 7th in missed tackles forced per attempt. The hope here is that Jacksonville can control the game against the Patriots, or at least not just get blown out like they did against the Bears. I think this game's going to be close, which means that if that is the case, we're going to see a lot of Bigsby in potentially a positive or neutral game script. It's a good matchup. Bigsby should make up for last week. Get him in your flex, your RB2 spot. I think he's going to have a really nice day against the Patriots, who have allowed the 6th most fantasy points to running backs. So remember, last week had nothing really to do with Bigsby. He just didn't get opportunities because Jacksonville got down big right away. I just don't see that happening against the Patriots, even with Drake May. I think this is going to be a close game, which means if Jacksonville is smart, they're going to feed Bigsby. So get him in your lineup. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you took away anything from the video, if you could please like the video, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out more than you know, and I will see you in the next one.